Coming real live. Oh, we're live. I just got the
We
live.
are live. Kate is very nervous. Hello, and welcome to the first ever episode of Two Chicks, One Show, presented by allgeektome.net, where we are going to discuss one currently airing show, an episode a week. My name is Tricia Ennis, she's Kate Calabro, and we're the Two Chicks. Today's one show is Outlander, episode 1, Cessnach.
Okay, so Outlander is produced by the premium channel Starz, and it's adapted by the best-selling novel series by Diane Gabal. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. There's a
I'm going with Gabolden, personally.
Golden. If you go on her website, there's a whole paragraph dedicated to pronouncing her name, so I'm so sorry if you did it wrong. I did do the research. The first episode aired this past Saturday and got pretty good pretty good ratings, but the ratings even boosted more because they did a whole week-long free online debut.
Yeah, I think the networks are finally starting to understand the power of like giving something away for free before they say give us your money for it. So anyway, the first episode, Sassenach, aired on Saturday, as you said. So let's go over what happened in the first episode.
Okay.
So why don't you get us started? So we met our three main characters.
Okay, so we met our three main characters in the first episode. We met Claire, who's a former nurse in the military. It takes place a couple weeks after the end of World War II. Then we met her husband, Frank Randall, who worked in intelligence in London. And then we met our third main character, who is Jamie, a Scotsman from the 18th century.
Yay!
Yay.
It's kind of a weird love triangle because it takes place in two different time periods. So anyway, we get into the show. Now the war is over. Claire and Frank, they've been married the whole time the war's been going on, which for England was more than the 5 years like that we think about World War II. It was actually like more like 7. But they haven't seen each other in about 5 years. She says they've seen each other 10 days over the last 5 years. So they decide to take a second honeymoon in the Scottish Highlands. Frank is researching his family history while he's there. He's a historian, and he tells Claire about one of his ancestors, Blackjack Randall, who was in the military. He was stationed in Scotland during the late 18th century, and they decide to one day take in a druidic ritual in the area. And when Claire goes back to the location to pick up a flower she saw, she touches one of the magic stones, and bam, 18th century Scotland. She meets a bunch of people there. So one of the people she meets is Blackjack Randall, which is her husband's ancestor, who's also really, really not nice. And then she also meets Jamie and like puts his shoulder back into place and saves his life after he gets shot. So let's get into what we thought about the pilot. So Kate, what were your first reactions to the first episode? And apparently we are having some technical difficulties. We are frozen. I'm hoping you can still see me. I can still see me. I'm going to re-invite Kate to the show. Live television, guys. Live television. Anyway, so yeah, the first episode is really interesting. It sort of takes place in two halves. You have the first half where you meet Claire and her husband, you get to know them, and then you have the second half where you meet all of the 18th century Scottish people. It looks like Kate will be rejoining us shortly. And the two halves are really interesting because they provide like a mirror image of each other. Because you have her relationship with her husband Frank and how women are perceived in that time period, and you also have her relationship with Jamie and how women are perceived there. Hey, Kate is back.
Or do we have to?
We are still live, so we're just gonna get right back into it. Yep.
Right.
You're still live.
Mine says all fair. Whatever.
So anyway, I was just starting with the review. I was saying how the first episode is really interesting because it shows like a mirror image of like the first half is her and her husband, and then the second half is her and her relationship with Jamie, and seeing the same location from two different time periods. So, what were your first thoughts?
Um, well, I think I mentioned to you the first time I watched it was that I think it's the cinematography is really well done, and I think it has half of that has to do with just the beauty of the landscapes of what we're seeing in Scotland. The story, I've talked to several people, and they thought that the first half with her and Frank were kind of a little bit dull, whereas like the action didn't really pick up until she time traveled. But I believe that the what we've seen with her and Frank will play into her future decisions now that she's stuck in the 18th century. And
In what way?
I think she's going to have a difficult time trying to let go of Frank and her past, because clearly there's going to be a romance between her and Jamie. But I think it's going to be a delayed kind of thing, because she is, in her mind, she's still married to Frank. It doesn't matter that she's time traveled.
Right.
So I think that's where the whole Frank storyline really needed to take place, and we needed that time with them to understand it.
I agree. I think the two men are sort of obvious foils for each other. They like you have Frank, who's a historian, who's an intellectual, who's very sort of soft-spoken. He's jovial and fun and everything, but he's also like he didn't see battle during the war. He was
Yeah.
in intelligence, like you said. So when his experience of the war is very, very different from someone who may have been infantry, some of the people that Claire was actually spending the last 5 years with, whereas Jamie is a soldier. He's in the thick of it. He's, soldier, I guess, as much as you could be. I don't entirely know the historical context. I'm going to read up on that for the future. But they are fighting. They are fighting the Redcoats. So Jamie is very much on the ground. And you also see Frank in early on when he first sees that weird ghost guy. He's all, did you treat many Scotsmen, and is this possibly someone that you were with? And he's obviously really worried about how their relationship is. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that, more like obvious foils for each other, and what she likes about Frank isn't necessarily what she likes about Jamie.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought Frank was extremely boring and very dry, but I completely disagree. I think the fact that we see Frank and he has this extreme passion for his finding out about his heritage and his ancestors, and even as a Brit going to Scotland, he has this great desire to experience and see as much as what's going on in this little region, whereas she was kind of like, taking holidays, like that kind of stuff, whereas Frank was like telling her all about it. So I think even though Frank is kind of, history guy, I thought he was very interesting, and I think that will also come into play where he isn't going to be like Jamie whatsoever.
Yeah, they're going to be very different people, and they're going to also have to bring out different aspects of who Claire is, because when she's with Frank, she's very much a woman of her time, so she's willing to be in the background essentially, because like women didn't have jobs and stuff. Like she doesn't have a job anymore. She was a nurse. In the books, her husband actually is the one that tells her to take up botany. By the way, I read about 5 pages of the first book, so I am not an expert. But he's the one that tells her to take up botany because he thinks it'll be something to keep her mind busy now that she's not nursing. In the show, it makes it sound like it was her idea. But either way, like she's an intelligent woman. She understands things. She's smart. She carries on conversations, and she's in a relationship with someone who lets her be an independent, strong-willed person. And she's getting thrown back to a patriarchal society where that's not gonna fly. She already is having trouble when she talks back to these Scotsmen, and so it's going to be interesting to see someone like her who would very much have been a Rosie the Riveter type, although she was a military nurse, who probably would have been one of the people in the mid-40s, advocating for more women in workplaces. Again, not totally sure how it was in England during 45. But now she's in this place where women are property,
Mhm.
more or less. So it's going to be interesting to see how she reacts to that.
Well, I think just in general, I think her and Frank had a more progressed relationship than what was actually happening during the 40s. I think Frank really does see her as an equal, whereas I don't know if many marriages during that time period were as solid as Frank and Claire's.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how all the relationships were. I think it always depended on the man and how like progressive he was. Frank seems, yes, very progressive, and he's meant to, I think, be seen as sort of a softer, not in a bad way, person who has passions outside of hitting things,
Yeah.
which he very much does. One thing about Claire that I noticed while watching the show the second time was that she's extremely well equipped for the time period she's about to end up in. Like, not only was she a combat medic, like, she wasn't just a nurse, she was in the field while they were fighting,
Yeah.
sewing wounds and treating things on the fly, and, so she wasn't in a nice little hospital. So she's got combat medic experience. She is a botany nerd who specifically likes to look at plants for their medicinal values, which makes sense with being a nurse. And she grew up roaming around the world with her uncle, learning how to, quote, dig latrines and other things that would be unseemly for women who are of her gentrification, essentially. So
Yeah.
she's going back to this time when she's going to have to live like that, and she's used to it already, which I don't know what that necessarily means for the show. Like, my initial thought was, ooh, that's convenient. But then when you think about it, that allows them to deal with the shell shock of a time period way less, like where someone like you or me would go back there and be like, oh my god, I have to pee in a hole in the ground.
Yeah.
And someone like her is like, oh yeah, I've done this before. So then she can focus on the culture shock of
I
like,
think it's going to be more of culture shock versus actual time period. Because even I think we spend like maybe a half hour in 18th century Scotland in the first episode, and even then, like by the end, she's still kind of like, oh, where like I'm time travel, but she's more worried about the individuals around her versus the actual situation.
yeah,
Like, will she be able to survive? Probably.
probably, but also you have to wonder, will she be able to survive because of the society that she's in? So she is really headstrong. She could get, skewered just because she says the wrong thing to the wrong man. I mean, she very nearly got raped by Blackjack Randall, who he's going to be lovely throughout the course of the series, I'm sure. But actually, I'm more worried about whoever his patron is, the person who's giving him the money to be there, because they make mention of him, and they're talking about how the guy was probably this really unseemly character in the area at the time, so I think he's probably going to come in more into play. And everyone who reads the books is watching this and laughing at me right now, because they already know. Probably.
Both guys, okay, just give us a break.
We didn't read them. We're going to try. Eventually. There's a lot of them, and they're long. But I mean, so I think that they're definitely going for more of the culture shock. I also, she's a little frustrating. Like, on first watch of the show, like I had mentioned this to you before, but I was really annoyed that she almost immediately is like, oh, I suddenly realized that I was no longer in the 20th century. So she automatically knows that she's time traveled, but yet at the end of the episode, she's calling for iodine and all this stuff that she must know they don't have in 18th century Scotland. And I'm just kind of like, why are you really intelligent one moment and really unable to just, like, it's frustrating. But I don't necessarily dislike her.
Yeah, I don't dislike Claire. I think there were moments where she was just like, really, like I think it was like those kind of things where I'm just like, come on. I think when she does time travel, I do like the point where she like thought for a second that she like stumbled upon a movie set. She's like, did I like? But I think there were like, I think what bothered me about her was the fact that she wasn't as interested in the Scottish culture as like much as Frank was. Like Frank was like, oh, well, this is. So I think that's what annoyed me the most about her, was that she kind of saw it all as silly, which is then I guess like the ironic part, because then she gets transformed into being an 18th century Scotland. I do think she's an extremely strong lead female character. I think she demands the attention of everybody when she enters a room. So I think it's great to have such a strong female character within the series, but she was a little dry for me in the first episode.
I can see why you'd think she'd be a little dry. I mean, I think you're also reading a little more into her disinterest in the history, because she isn't really all that interested in history. Like, her character doesn't care that much.
Mm-hmm.
But her husband is a historian. Like, he's going to teach at Oxford once they're done with their honeymoon. I would love to know what's going to happen with that situation, and also how much time is going to pass in the first season.
Mm-hmm.
Again, people reading the books are laughing at me. But, so it'll be interesting to see how his scholarly pursuits change, and also how his obvious self-consciousness, essentially, about their relationship will play into how hard he looks for her.
Yeah.
Because they weren't together when she disappeared. She went off by herself, and suddenly she's gone. And she says in the beginning, you know, people disappear all the time. They walk away one day, they take all the money, and they leave, you know. So it's very possible that he will start to think that she left him.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, maybe she could have. Also, but I do think one of the things we should talk about, especially because this is a premium television show and they can do more of it, is their use of sex in the show. Because it's probably awkward to talk about, but at the same time, I think they use it really interestingly. One of my pet peeves with like Game of Thrones and basically anything else on premium television is that they just sort of throw it in there so that you're like, boobs! And this show is sort of like, we're making a statement.
Mm-hmm. I think the first time you see Frank and Claire engage in sexual activity is their first night in the bed and breakfast at Scotland, and it was I felt like it was necessary for the storyline because they're reconnecting as a married couple, and it was a little bit more romantic versus vulgar as some of the other things on Game of Thrones may be.
Game of Thrones is going to come up a lot, I think.
And you see them go down to the bed, and then you hear the bed creaking, and then you see the M lady, and she's like smiling because she's like, oh, I know what you guys are doing. I thought that was very nicely done. I think the second time they have, and was at the castle.
Yeah, which actually, there was an article on Entertainment Weekly that made a really good point about that scene. We'll get back to that. You were saying.
Okay. I think also that was tastefully done to prove that she is, I think it was a character thing for Claire. I don't think it was a necessary. I'm sorry, what?
The thing in the castle?
Yeah. I think it was, my opinion is it wasn't necessarily to show desire, sexual desire. I thought it was to show that she was in control of majority of the situations. It was a controlling trait that we see within Claire as an independent woman that knows what she wants.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the point I was about to make with the article I read earlier, is that it's less about, oh, look, they're doing an oral sex scene and the woman being serviced by the man. It was that she's the one who instigates it, and she actually instigates, I think, all of the sexual encounters between her and Frank in the first episode. And she talks about sex, like, openly with the audience. She's like, this was our way of connecting and coming together, and it's how we, you know, fixed things, essentially, whether or not that's a healthy thing.
That's a different conversation.
Yeah, that's a different conversation. But, I mean, there's the fact that she is very liberal about sex, and in some ways talking about sex, but definitely she's, like, extremely flirtatious. She instigates all of it. And they point out in the EW article that this is a rare occasion where we actually specifically see the woman being pleasured
Yeah.
rather than the man, where usually it ends when the man is finished, and this was like, nope, we're going to show you her face.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting from like a feminist perspective. It's a different way to be feminist. It's not all I am woman, hear me roar. It's, get down on your knees.
Yeah, you're being comfortable with your own sexuality and your own desires, and she clearly is.
And they're married, so there's like literally nothing
wrong with it. Yeah.
Exactly. So I thought that was really, really interesting, and it's one of the ways I think premium cable almost doesn't always take advantage of their ability to do things like that. Like Game of Thrones throws sex in there sometimes to make a point, but not always. A lot of times it's there to be shock value, or to say, hey, look, boobs. I know we just talked a lot. You have some boobs. Or we're talking a lot now, so I'll also show you boobs while we talk. I think that at least so far, it's just one episode, but so far they're using it as a narrative device, and as a way to actually promote feminism in some ways. So I think that's really interesting.
I don't think there's really any debate whether Claire is a feminist or not. Clearly,
she's most definitely a feminist.
So I think there's also that, and I think you're dealing with a more female-oriented audience. So of course they're gonna,
It was what, more than half of the viewing audience was female?
It was 51% female.
Ew, 51%.
Yeah, but considering that leaves 48% was male, that's still pretty big for, I wouldn't expect that much to be a male viewing for Outlander.
I would love to know how many of those were A, gay people, and B, husbands being forced to sit down and watch it with their wives. I
watched the online premiere when it came on for free, and then my dad I watched it again with my dad on Saturday because he was like, I want to know how she time travels. Like, he was like really into it, and he's like, it doesn't really get exciting until she goes to Scotland.
Okay. Speaking of time travel, they don't explain the device, and I really hope they don't. I want to leave it as magic, because if they start explaining how the time travel works, especially if they start getting into time paradoxes, I'm going to be a little pissed off.
I don't think they will. I think it was the whole thing where, and this can enter into, I have already a crap load of predictions, which I'm sure people that read the book are going to laugh at us about. Like, the fact that she went to the stones, she saw the witches dancing, and then she goes back. Can we just talk for a second that she goes back to find forget-me-nots?
Yes.
Come on. Can we just, I love shit like that. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I live for. When they put, little things in that, in shows and books, you're just like, you got it. Forget-me-nots. But, clearly there's, some kind of magic Scottish crap going on there where, the stone just magically starts vibrating all of a sudden, and then boom, she's transported. So I don't think we're going to see, the Doc coming in his car to take her back. So
yeah, I think there are a lot of things you can I think that part of it is also the I think Ronald D. Moore, being the showrunner, actually will play into it a lot. The last big thing he did was Battlestar Galactica, and that show was half mysticism, half human experience, and it was. They did a few things where a little explanation would have been really nice, but for the most part, the show was really well planned out. And this one is based on a book series, so I think it's going to be even more planned out. So I'm more than willing to be more along for the ride than waiting for explanations and scientific conversation, because I don't know how you would categorize it. It's not necessarily science fiction, but time travel always makes it science fiction. So I think it's sort of an interesting combination of science fiction, fantasy, and romance. Which is interesting. So speaking of predictions, how do we think things will play out in the first season? I don't know how. I don't have very many right now, but I know you have a lot. So
I have a couple. I think. Well, we have to remember that the first season has already been divided into two halves. So we're going to get the first half of the season through September. So I'm assuming something big's going to have to happen mid-season for them to end it like that. Then the second season won't start up until early 2015, second half of the first season.
Okay.
So I think you can disagree. I think it's safe to say that I initially thought that she would be time traveling back and forth, but I'm getting the feeling that we're going to be in Scotland for a long time.
I did not think she was going to be traveling back and forth.
I don't know where I got that from, but I had like this like feeling that she was going back and forth between Frank and Jamie.
Okay, yeah, I didn't get that necessarily. Granted, I did read a little on the Wikipedia page before I watched it, so I knew a little of what was going to happen. Just out of curiosity, when I first heard they're making Outlander, I was like, "What is Outlander?" So I'm pretty sure it's going to stay. I mean, I don't know how they would explain her going back and forth.
Yeah.
At all. So I think she's definitely going to be staying in Scotland. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing things that bleed through. I think the ghost is a bleed through. The ghost that Frank keeps seeing is a sort of bleed through. I wouldn't be surprised if she like leaves a message somehow, like scratches something onto something and tries to leave a message. Yeah, Bad Wolf style. But so I wouldn't be surprised if we see little instances where the past and the future coincide. But for the most part, I think Claire's experience is going to be in the past.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if that necessarily means anything for Frank. I don't know if we're going to be seeing a lot of Frank, or if it's going to be Frank, the actor who plays him, as Blackjack Randall.
Yeah.
So who do you think?
I didn't hear that. What?
Who do you think the ghost is?
I have a theory that the ghost is older Jamie who finds out inevitably that Claire time traveled, and now he's done the steps of time travel back to inform Frank of what happened to Claire.
Okay. So you think it's Jamie?
I think it's Jamie. And unlike Game of Thrones.
What?
I just want to say, unlike Game of Thrones, I completely have not read anything. I don't want to be spoiled whatsoever, so this is I could be completely wrong. I have no clue. I don't want to know. I'm along for the ride. So.
Okay, I am planning on reading the first book before we get too far into the season. Probably not before we get through it. When does the first half of the season end?
The end of September, I believe.
So I think I should finish the first book before then. There's a lot going on in August, so who the heck knows at this point. But so I will know things and will therefore probably not participate in much of predictions in the future. Mm-hmm. But right now, I think the ghost is Jack Randall, Blackjack Randall, or someone associated with him. I don't know. I think they're gonna like figure out that they can do stuff and gonna end up. I don't know. I have no idea. But
okay. He was going to get killed, so I don't know.
He was. I guess I wasn't paying that close attention. So maybe it is Jamie. Maybe you're right.
I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know if
Yeah. Maybe it's one of Jamie's friends. Maybe it's gonna be somebody totally random.
Yeah.
Maybe Jack, the kilt-wearing Scotsman. He won't.
Yeah.
Do you have other predictions?
I think the young girl that shows back up when Claire and Randall are still at the Headstones, and then they like disappear. I think she has to have something to do with. I think maybe she's a past ancestor of Claire's, who's now like. I have a feeling that Claire eventually is going to tell somebody about what happened to her, and there's going to be like a little throughout, like how you said, like little drippets throughout time leading to their series present day, which is 1945.
Okay. I don't disagree. I think that maybe she'll be a person who can go back and forth. Like who the heck knows? But I'm really interested in the ride that we're gonna get.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any other final thoughts on the show?
No, I'm excited that I'm going in spoiled free at the moment. I can't make promises. I have a a thing for Wikipedia pages. So, but right now I'm excited.
I have a thing for reading everything about a show when I first start watching it. So
So
I'm good at not being spoiled.
yeah, so I'm trying really, really hard to be spoiled free at the moment, but I'm genuinely excited to see what happens and how this is going to play out and what's going. I'm really worried about like what's going to happen with Frank. I don't know why. I'm like really invested in Frank's story.
I actually am too. I think just because I like him. I think he's a cool guy.
Yeah,
I'm also really interested. I don't necessarily love the show the way I've loved some shows right off the bat, but for the most part, I think they take some warming up, and I think this was a good start. I don't know what my opinion will be once I start reading the book, um, but from the first 5 pages, it seems like a pretty good adaptation. But so I'm really interested. I think it looks great. I think the actors are so far very good. I have all the faith in the world in Ronald D. Moore because of Battlestar Galactica, despite the last season. Shut up, nerds. And yeah, I mean, I'm along for the ride. So I think we're gonna wrap things up, right?
yeah.
All right.
So
So
we
well,
got it.
that's it. That's it for us here at Two Chicks One Show, our inaugural episode. We hope you liked it. We will be back next week discussing the second episode of Outlander, which will air this Saturday. Just leave your
Yeah.
comments, thoughts, ideas, anything in the comments down below.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're watching this on allgeektv.net or on YouTube, you can leave comments. And I think that's it.
All right. See you
So
next week.
goodbye. See you next week. So long.